Hi, it's Andy again, and I got another tutorial for you today. Today I'm going to go over creating a SQLite database for your Android project. Now, SQLite is the preferred database type, but you can use others. You can use XML if you really wanted to. I know some apps that I've downloaded have saved stuff in XML file, but by far, probably the easiest way to do this is to use a SQLite database. Now, if you don't know what SQLite is, it's a type of database language that allows you to create tables. Now, the best visual demonstration I can show you is doing something like an Excel spreadsheet, where you have your columns on top. So let's say I wanted to create a database, which I'm going to show you the layout in the app. It's just people. So for this one, you would do something like name. And let's say if you wanted to add more, you could do address, phone number, and that's exactly what Android does. Is your actual contacts are stored in a very similar SQLite database. It's basically a modified SQLite database. A lot of the calls are even named the same. It acts the same. So if you wanted to use SQLite, or if you know SQLite and you wanted to, get your contacts or get the user's contacts information, you can do that with the same kind of SQLite calls. Or if you know that and didn't know SQLite, well, guess what? You're already ahead of the game because you pretty much do. Now, for this, the database that I'm going to show you today, we're not going to do phone number, so we'll get rid of phone. And we're not going to do address. Well, we're just going to create a list of people's names. Now, these all have an ID, and so that ID is just basically going to be your row number. So I guess if you get rid of A and you put name on there, you would start at 1 or 0. I believe it starts at 1. It might start at 1. I think so. Unlike where if you have a list view and your position starts at 0. So SQLite, I don't believe is 0 based. I believe it's 1 based, as far as you start at 1 and then you go up. You don't go negative. Negatives are bad. Negatives throw SQLite exceptions, so you don't want to do that. If you ever see anything with in your database where you have a negative number called, that means that you have a SQLite error, and it's likely due to your name. So this is the best way I can kind of show you how to do this. So we're going to let's create a few names, and I'll change this to ID, since that's the one we're going to actually store first, is the ID, and then we'll put this as the name. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this in the app. Now, SQLite doesn't have a visual interface. Now, why would that be appealing? Well, the reason why it doesn't have a visual interface is because, unlike really Excel and probably the way that you use it, you can actually link multiple tables together among a common goal. So let's say I have this ID field and I have another table with the same ID. Well, let's say I created another table with friends instead of people, but I wanted to link which friends go which people. You could totally do that and create a whole new table with the two tables linked together, so you get one table. So that's why there's no real visual interface defaulted, because that's up to you. And also your display, you can display what you want to display. You don't have to display like on here, I don't really want to display the ID of a person, but it's included. Or you can just filter out and you can sort. There's a lot of sorting functions built into SQLite that are very powerful and very fast. So we're going to do this. We'll start at 1. We'll just make 3 people, and we're gonna add these people as well. So John, Jim, James. we'll add these people into our app. So we'll give you a visual look of what this app looks like. Here we go. So it's just an edit text, and down below here, which you can't see, is actually a list view. So the first name was John. Oh, well, and we'll save that person. Next one was Jim and James. Those are our 3 people. Now I also included a method on how to delete this. So if you long click, boom, deleted, deleted, deleted. Now those people, when you delete it, you don't get rid of their ID. You just get rid of that row entirely. So if I deleted the first person, their ID number is still the same constant. It's kind of like if I were to go into the database over here and I were to delete the row for Jim, delete row, okay, you know, 1 and 3 are still there. That's exactly how this is. So and instead of, I think in Excel, if you were to delete this way, it shifts everything up. So that's why I didn't think that would actually work like this. But there you go. So that's how this is the general idea of what we're doing. We're creating a list of names just for this very primitive SQLite example. So let's go into the code. I just have in the layouts, I'm actually just originally started with a fragment and just deleted that idea because just to keep it simple. First thing we're doing is creating the layout for the edit text and the button as it tries to generate over here, and that's this this layout over here, and then the list view underneath it. Very simple. You can give everything an ID, and the list has to be well, in this case we're giving it the Android ID of list, so it pre-populates here and it's just easier to deal with. So we're going to do a list activity. Remember to initialize your button and your edit text. I won't go into this quite yet because I'll go into that in a second. And we want to generate a list, so we have our array adapter, and then because I'm going to do some stuff with the list view, we're actually going to define it because I need to be able to edit the list view. Once we add and remove people, we want the list to repopulate. So that's why the list view, you need to initialize it. Plus we need to set it long clickable down here. So let's go into the database setup. First, we'll create a database helper file. This is actually really the meat and potatoes for your database. We're going to give it a name, so we're going to make that name static and final. We're going to set a version to it, which is an integer, and I'll explain that in a second why you want to set a database version for this. Now we're going to create a table. So you have to give that table a name because you can have multiple tables. So each table needs a name, and then each column needs a name. So you have your table name and then your column names. Basically, instead of having A, B, and C, etc. on the top, you're giving them this name of like ID or name or whatever. There are some restrictions. SQLite does not support capitalization, so in here you'd have to do like name like that. So you want to make sure, and no spaces. So absolutely no spaces. You can use underscore, but no spaces. Sorry, capital to start the. You can't capitalize the first letter, but you can use the capitalization kind of like you would do to any Java method or programming method that you're probably used to, where you lowercase the first word and then uppercase everything after that. So just know you can start it with an underscore, no spaces, and don't start it with a capital letter, and that you should be good with that. You don't really need any more information on that. I don't really know the other restrictions, but you can you might not be able to put numbers or something like that in the name. I'm not really quite sure all of it, but if you stick to this kind of naming pattern, it will definitely be fine for you. Next, we need to create a string to create the table. So that's a... Oh, also, make these public because we're going to be using them in another file. So you want to make these public because if you don't remember exactly what you named this, you can just, if you remember generally what you've named the thing, you can refer to this in other classes. So it'd probably be a better idea to name this however you want, and you can reference it in other classes, which we will do in a helper in data source file, and I'll explain why we're using the data source file as well. So next thing we need to do is create a string that we're going to create the entire table, and this is all in SQLite syntax. So you start off with create table, then you need the table name, then inside parentheses, or sorry, colons. Ugh. You need to initialize your columns. So the first column is going to be your ID, and this is what we want it this way because we're going to use this as the primary key. What we're going to order everything by, and we're not actually going to specify the IDs ourselves. We're going to let SQLite do that for us, so we're going to auto increment it. So that means when we add something, it starts at 1, it puts in 2, it puts in 3, automatically for us. We don't even need to know that. That's awesome. And then the next thing, we're going to do the actual name of the person, and that's just a text. So the data types in SQLite are even more primitive than you probably are used to with things like Java and programming and Android and stuff like that. It's either an integer or a text. There's some, you can do raw data types. I forgot what they're called. But each one of these has their own uses in SQLite. You can order something by number, which this is going to automatically order it by the person ID. But we can change it to make everything in alphabetical order based on the person name. And I'll show you in a little bit where that goes. Because Android, you can use a method called raw query if you're used to doing SQLite commands. You can Google those. But also Android kind of simplifies it and created all these methods to kind of replace those. So you can do the same things, but it's kind of more structured. So I'm going to show you what those look like, and that's what I'm actually going to use. I'm going to use query instead of raw query. But each one of the little arguments inside the specified query have certain things that have to go in place. So that's where you would sort, you can group, you can do a lot of different things with the SQLite commands. Next, we have to initialize the database helper. So if you're starting this out, this will autocomplete with a bunch of stuff. Delete everything but the context for now. So the context we're going to do this is going to be the main activity in this case. You want to give it the database name, which we have specified up here. Now, if you wanted to store this in a different location than the default database, which is private, and you really only can access it on something like forgot what this is called, the device monitor. I'll show you how that all works in just a second. But this is going to be a powerful tool for editing or checking your databases and stuff. So you're going to pull the name from there. Ignore this part. This is a factory. Ignore that. Then the version. Now it's important to version your database, because if you want to update items into your database, all you do is change this up here, and it automatically calls this onUpgrade method, where you can handle certain changes. So if somebody's going from version 1 to version 3, you don't want to give the same code as someone going from version 2 to 3, because you've made changes from going from 1 to 2. So there's reasons for that, and it'll cause a lot of errors. If something does not match the current database, let's say a table or column name or table name or something like that, you will crash your program and it won't be recoverable. So the person's going to have to completely delete the database, and your users are going to be very upset. So to handle upgrades and stuff like that, you version it and you call this method here. We're not dealing with this really, so you didn't have to do this, but this is an example of one method that you can call. Let's say I completely changed all of the table, I changed the column names. What this will do is if I change it, it won't crash because they'll completely delete that table and then recreate it with the new column names. But all the data is useless since the column names don't match, the information's not accurate. So you want to handle your changes there. Now the first thing we want to do is this onCreate, which is going to get called on the first launch of the app, is you want to create your database if it doesn't already exist. So that's what this is going to do. It'll call, we're going to say, okay, here we have the SQLite database. Execute a SQLite command, and we want to create the database. And the way we're doing that is by executing the SQLite string, basically. That's all what this is this is a SQLite command built into a string. Okay, so this is your helper file. This is what we're going to be calling in our main activity. Another important note is SQLite databases can lead to memory leaks, so you want to, and if they're not open, they're not editable or readable. So the best thing to do is you want on resume and on pause. At least these two. And on resume, we're going to open our database, and on pause, we're going to close our database. Now, this isn't the same file. These aren't methods that are called there. I'll show you where these methods are because we need to organize our data. So we've created two columns, and we want to write information to those two columns. But I've created another data source file to kind of organize all the commands we're going to be using for the database. Starting off before we actually do anything with this file, I created a string array for all the columns that are going to be used. And also we have a model. So I created an object of a person. Basically, every single time we call this person or this object, we're going to get all of this information, not just the person name. So this is useful if you wanted to create something with more than just a name. You wanted the address, the phone number, employment, everything that you wanted to know about that person. You can store it and transfer it as an object, and these are just getters and setters. So if you wanted to use this for multiple classes, but displayed different information in each class, but all the content is traveled with each transition to a different class. That's what you would do, and that's why you would create an object for the getter and setter. We only have two things. We only have the ID and the name, and you could totally get away with not even doing this and just doing the name. But I wanted to kind of introduce you to a more complex, more universal doing it. So this is just the model or the getters and setters for this thing I'm calling as a person. And also, we're only going to be displaying the name in the list. So I'm overriding this this method called toString, and we're just going to return the name. You can format this however you want. So if you wanted to add the name and their ID number, you can add that too. So you would just do plus space, let's see, person ID. Now, if we were to rerun this app, we're going to get both pieces of information when we run this. And this will help us find out if we're starting at 1 or 0. So I'll give you some more accurate information. So let's say I add my own name now. Oh, I've added several times and deleted several times. So it stays at 0. So if you wanted to clear the database, you can actually go into here and clear it. And now it'll start back at okay, so it starts at 1. All right, so if you don't realize what I did, all I did was instead of uninstalling the app, I just cleared its database by clearing the data, because I'll show you exactly where that file is stored onto the device, which isn't accessible on an actual device unless you are rooted. So if you are on a regular, store-bought, device, you won't be able to access the database. That's where this device monitor and having the emulator actually works very well for databases, because you don't actually necessarily always want your databases public and open to editing. One, the user can screw up the data. That's one thing. And two, you could, if you're developing a game, someone could edit your files and show that they got, let's say there's Angry Birds. They got 3 stars on everything. That's why you don't really want your databases public. So it's stored in a directory on Android devices that are private intentionally for that reason. So also you don't necessarily want your contacts and all that stuff, out in the open. So it's all stored there, private in data. So let's go back to our data source file. So we're just going to initialize some things here. We're initializing the helper file and the database. And then this is a required method initialization, or it may not actually be. We're just going to initialize this actual class and get the context that we're going to be using. In this case, it's going to be the activity, main activity. We'll create some methods for opening and closing the database. So when we open the database, we need to actually call a method called getWritable because we're going to be writing to the database. And then to close it, we can just call close. This is actually, that's name something that you would expect to be named, but to open the database, you have to actually get the database. You can also call getReadable, but you won't be able to write to it. So in this case, since we're adding stuff to the database, we want to get the writable database. Next, we are this is a method to create each person into the database. So content values, this is very similar this is the exact same as getting your contacts. So you're going to be using content values probably for other things, but this is a pretty easy way to set up your database and inserting stuff into the database. And all we're doing here is first we want to get the name that we are adding, and so that's what this is, this person model person. We're getting the person name, and then we're setting that as the name that we're going to insert into the database. Then we also need to get the ID. So we're going to set our ID, but that's why when I cleared the database and started from scratch, this counter essentially started back at 0. But when you delete items from the database, this counter didn't start at 0, and it has to do with this this long value here. Also, for the Java, we're using longs, but also using integers. It's kind of a weird thing with in the Java part, we're going to set it as a long, but in the database, they're setting it as an integer. So that's because this whole method returns a long value. So, but that's okay. They're completely compatible for the saving purposes. It's kind of just a weird thing where if you're in the Java, you're going to use long, and then in the database, it's just integer. If you're saving a number, just save it as an integer, or raw data type file if you actually need a float or something like that. Okay, so we need a way to get the actual names that we're storing in the database. So we're going to create a list, and instead of creating a list with a string, we're going to use this model that we've overridden the toString method. So we call this method findPeople, and we're going to just create a new array list. And then cursor. So cursor is how we're going to navigate our database. And basically, remember how I mentioned earlier that we have query and raw query? The query is the Android specific content that is very similar to a raw query, but it's structured. So we could do this exact same command by using raw query. It's just going to be one giant long string instead. So we need to specify first the table, which columns we want to include in our data, which in this case we're going to include all of them. That's why we specified them up here, and it's reusable for other methods. I forget what some of these do, but if I wanted to sort the data by alphabetical, I could change this to database helper dot people person name, and this will alphabetize the names. So if I run this again, let's kind of show you how that works. And you can do ascending and descending. You would add that as a string afterwards. But I think by default it's descending. So let's say I wanted to add somebody with the name AA, which would be before me if we alphabetize it, but after me if we use the ID. See, by adding AA, we sorted it now into descending alphabetical order. So adding a third person with the name like Bob will show up below me, and that's because we've now arranged this to go in alphabetical order. So that's one of the neat, powerful tools with the database that you don't have to write any code for. You just change a certain property from the query file. So now we're going back into the cursor. And now we wanted to check to make sure that the items in the database aren't 0. So the cursor get counts is greater than 0. Then we need to create a while loop. It's like, so while it's moving to the next item on the list, we want to add these people into our array list. So first we're going to create a new person. We're going to add some information about that person. So we're going to set its ID and set its name, and then add that to the array. And now notice how our list is the person model. If we did only a string, we can only add strings to it. But since we've created this object as a person model, you can add whatever the hell you want. You can add anything, literally anything, and it can pass on between class to class by implementing a parsable or something like that. So we're going to add this, and the reason why we wait till we go to the next item to save this to the list is that we make sure that we've gotten all the information. So that's why before we go on to item number 2, we make sure we have all of item number 1 already in the memory, and then we're going to save it into a list. And so that's all we're doing here with this find people. And then here's the code real quick to delete a person. It's very straightforward. This where is just where we're going to delete it. You can put that here manually. You don't have to actually create a string. And the reason why I'm doing this as an integer is because it's a Boolean property. If we fail, this returns something other than 1. So I think it returns -1. And that's a database thing. Remember how I told you that anytime you get a negative number in SQLite, you have an error. So this Boolean property is just going to be 1 or -1. And if it's 1, means it's succeeded, and then we know that the database deleted that person. If it failed, it would return -1, and that person that we were trying to delete didn't get deleted. So that's for kind of like a debugging purposes thing, just to go through the methods on how we access the database, read the database, and edit that database to either add or delete something. So we have our create, which is adding, and our delete, which is deleting. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to incorporate all of this into our list, or our entire activity. So we have our save, our text that we need to get the information from. We have our list that we're creating to put into the list view. We have our data source, our adapter, and normally you wouldn't put this as a global variable, but we needed to in this case because I'm also putting this into a background async task for performance issues. With this, if we were to run this exact app on a normal device, it wouldn't really lag at all. But to be up on current standards, if we wanted to put a lot of information, let's say our list had, hundreds of items instead of, 1 item or 3 items or something like that, it could bog down the system. So we want to put that in an async task, which is what I've done in this case. And then we also need to initialize our list view, and this is for updating the list afterwards. So we're gonna refresh everything again after we've do it. Normally you would update a list view by calling notify dataset change, but that doesn't work in this instance. It doesn't work with a regular array adapter, which is, for simplicity's sake, is what I'm using here. So all you're doing is we need to open up the database when we create it. So on create, I've opened it because we need to access it to read it. And I've also on resume. So let's say we go and we do something else and we come back to it. We want that database to be readable. So that's why we're specifying the same thing in on resume. And then we need to initialize our variables, which we're doing here. Our button, our edit text, and our list view. We're setting the list view as long clickable, and then on our save, we want to save the new information and add it to the database. So we need to call the create data source create. So on our on click, one thing that you have to do is you have to check to see if your edit text is null, because if you try to save a null value, you may get an error. So I just put in a catch. So if we try to save this, it adds it anyway. So I guess you can ignore this because it's going to create an ID, and you can store null values in SQLite. But normally, if you have a null and you point to it in Java, you would have a null pointer exception. So that's exactly what by definition a null pointer exception is. If you get that, it's because for some reason it's returning null and it was expecting something else. So you can ignore this since it doesn't seem to work anyway. But we're gonna create a string, and we're going to get the text from the edit text and turn it into a string. So that's what this is, text, get text to string. We want to create a new person because we're going to add this person into the database. So then we're going to say person, set the person name, and data source that create person. And remember, it creates the ID automatically, which is why this isn't actually working. And it stores the ID with whatever text, and we're automatically creating the ID. We're auto incrementing it, so it doesn't really. You can specify the ID too, but in this case, you know, we've determined that we don't care what the ID is. We're just auto incrementing it. Then we want to update our text view or edit text to be 0 again, or empty again. And so that's what this is. And then the next thing we're doing is calling our AsynkTask again to repopulate the list. So all I'm doing is in an AsynkTask, boom, this, specifying that our list is now redoing the list is data source.find people, and then since this is actually the visual parts, you can't put this in the background since this requires the UI thread, which we're avoiding here. This is non-UI thread, UI thread. So we're refreshing the list, the display, by calling the adapter and setting the adapter. So that's all we're doing here with this. So next thing we need to do is be able to delete an item. So we're gonna set an on item long click listener. This isn't really the best way to do this, and I'll show you why. So I've created two people. Let's say I create another person with the name Andy, and we'll save it. So I have two people here. If I delete one, it deletes both. So long click. Oh, it's not working. Oh, I know why it's not working. Because I edited the model. If I get rid of this part, so let's get rid of this. So that's why it's not deleting, is because I specified by the actual text and not the position. So let's see. We'll run this again, and now when I run this, I'll be able to delete. Okay, when I run this again, if I delete this, it deletes all of them. If I delete one, it deletes both. Because I'm not, first of all, when I'm creating the database, I'm not telling it to get rid of duplicates. And two, when I'm deleting an item from the database, I'm telling the database to look for anything with this name and delete it. So probably the best way to actually do this is to do it by position, which you would edit your data source file. You would edit your delete thing. So instead of putting a string, you would put instead your long position, and you can delete your position. But remember, your position starts at 0 and your IDs start at 1. Or so you want to make sure you add 1 to it if you're going to delete it that way. So hope this was a good intro to SQLite databases, and I hope you get your database on, because this will be helpful for storing your databases or storing information onto your device